My fiancé announced, "The wedding is off unless you buy me a bigger ring. I deserve at least 3 carats." I said, "You're right, it's off." The next morning, she found the engagement ring posted online with the caption, "Barely worn." I used to think I was lucky. Out of all the ways my life had stumbled and straightened itself out, meeting Sophie felt like the jackpot. I was 31, working steadily in project management at a mid-sized firm, nothing glamorous but secure enough, and for the first time I felt like I had a future mapped out. Sophie came into my life through a friend of a friend. She was beautiful, confident, and carried herself with the kind of presence that turned heads. In the beginning, she made me feel like I was exactly the kind of man she had been waiting for. She laughed at my corny jokes, told me she respected my work ethic, and said stability was more attractive than flashy nonsense. At least, that's what she said then. It was easy to fall for her. 16 months after we met, I proposed. I didn't go overboard with some grand show, but I put my heart into it. I saved for months to buy a decent ring, nothing extravagant, but tasteful, a 1-carat diamond with a solid setting. I knew she liked elegance more than gaudiness, or at least I thought I knew. The first few weeks after the engagement felt surreal. Friends congratulated us, family started calling with plans, and we began talking venues. I was juggling budgets and timelines, spreadsheets and emails, all while trying to make sure Sophie felt supported. But then came the night that changed everything. We were sitting in her apartment, a small but cozy place she had decorated with endless scented candles and framed quotes about manifesting abundance. She had been scrolling through her phone, her eyes darting back and forth with that intensity she got when she was comparing herself to the people she followed online. Finally, she put the phone down, looked at me, and told me point blank, the wedding was off unless I bought her a bigger ring. She said she deserved at least 3 carats, minimum, and if I couldn't provide that, she wasn't interested in walking down the aisle. For a moment, I thought she was joking. Sophie had a sharp tongue, but she'd never framed something like that so coldly before. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire, impossible to wave away. I tried to process it. We had already started putting deposits down, already spoken to her parents about possible dates, already talked about moving in together once the wedding was official, and now, she was willing to throw all of that away over a shiny piece of jewelry. The shock quickly turned into clarity. There wasn't some deeper meaning behind what she had said. She wasn't testing me, wasn't teasing me. She was serious. She wanted the ring, and if I couldn't provide, I wasn't worth her time. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just sat there, letting the silence stretch, and realized the woman in front of me wasn't the same one I thought I had fallen for. Whatever mask she had worn before, it slipped in that moment. She wasn't interested in building a life together. She was interested in extracting as much value as she could. That night, after I went home, I stared at the ring sitting on the dresser. I had worked hard for it, chosen it carefully, believed it symbolized something real. Now it looked like a reminder of how easily I had been fooled. I slept little, replaying her words again and again until the meaning crystallized. She didn't love me for who I was. She loved the idea of what she thought I could give her. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I opened my laptop, logged into an online marketplace, and posted the engagement ring for sale. I wrote the caption with a bitterness that felt almost cathartic, barely worn. I attached a few clear pictures, hit submit, and leaned back in the chair. It was a small act, but it was mine. Not long after, my phone buzzed. The listing was live, and already people were viewing it. There was a strange satisfaction in knowing that anyone scrolling through would see the ring Sophie had once flaunted on her Instagram now reduced to just another item in the endless catalog of things people trade when they're done pretending it matters. I didn't think much beyond that until later in the day, when the ripple effects began. Friends of friends saw the post, people who knew us both. Screenshots traveled fast, pinging from one group chat to another, until it was impossible for Sophie to contain the story. By the time she woke up and realized what I had done, half her social circle already knew something had gone terribly wrong between us. I wasn't there to see her reaction, but I could imagine it. The woman who had prided herself on curating a perfect image now had to deal with a caption that cut through the illusion, barely worn. It was brutal in its simplicity, exposing the fragility of everything she'd built. The rest of that day moved like a slow wave. I went into work, pretended to focus on tasks, but every now and then I'd feel a flicker of adrenaline. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. I hadn't planned some elaborate scheme to humiliate her, but what I had done was enough to knock her off balance, and I knew it. By the evening, the fallout began trickling back to me. A mutual friend texted, asking if it was true, if I had really called the engagement off. I kept my answers short. Yes, it was over. No, I wasn't buying another ring. No, I didn't want to talk about it in detail. But even without me explaining, people were piecing together the truth. Sophie had made the mistake of venting in private chats about her disappointment with the ring size weeks earlier. Now, with my post circulating, those old complaints resurfaced like oil on water. The picture that emerged wasn't flattering. Sophie looked shallow, materialistic, and ungrateful. For a woman who thrived on social approval, it was a nightmare. And the best part? I didn't have to lift another finger. The damage was self-inflicted, just magnified by a single caption. That night, I went for a long walk through the city, headphones in, mind buzzing with everything that had happened in just 24 hours. I thought about the months I had spent believing I was building a future, the money I had saved, the time I had invested. It would have been easy to sink into bitterness, but instead, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. It was over. The mask had slipped before I was tied down forever. I knew Sophie wouldn't let it end quietly. That wasn't her style. She would fight, spin, manipulate, try to claw back her reputation. But for the first time, I wasn't worried. I had seen the truth, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. What I didn't know then was how far she would go, how desperate she would become, and how quickly things would spiral beyond a simple disagreement about a piece of jewelry. The ring was only the spark. The fire was still coming. By the next morning, the barely worn post had circulated so widely that even people I hadn't spoken to in years were sending me screenshots. Old college acquaintances, distant relatives, co-workers who normally kept quiet outside of office hours. They were all asking the same thing. What happened? Sophie, of course, had wasted no time in trying to rewrite the story. I learned through mutuals that she was calling me insecure, saying I had overreacted to a harmless comment about wanting a bigger ring. According to her, she had only joked about needing 3 carats. She painted me as emotionally unstable, someone who couldn't handle the pressure of an engagement. It might have worked if not for the evidence already out there. In one of her private group chats with her friends, she had bragged about how she could train me to level up the ring if she pushed hard enough. Those messages resurfaced almost instantly. Someone she trusted had leaked them. Suddenly, it wasn't just my word against hers. It was her own words laid out for everyone to see. That was the first major crack in the image she had built. Sophie had always crafted herself as the sophisticated, ambitious woman who only wanted what she deserved. Now she looked like someone grasping at status, willing to throw away an engagement for carats. Her reaction to the leak made things worse. Instead of stepping back and regrouping, she doubled down, attacking anyone who questioned her, lashing out in comments, blocking friends who didn't take her side. The more she tried to fight it, the uglier it got. And I just sat back, watching it unfold. But Sophie wasn't the type to accept defeat. She pivoted, sending me long emails and voice notes claiming she had been testing me. She insisted she only wanted to see how I'd react under pressure, that the whole bigger ring ultimatum was never real. She told me I was throwing away something special over a misunderstanding. I listened to none of it. I knew manipulation when I saw it. Still, I underestimated how far she was willing to go. A week later, I received a call from my bank. They wanted to confirm some details about a lease application tied to my name. My stomach dropped. I hadn't applied for any lease. After several long, intense phone calls, I learned the truth. Sophie had used my personal details, employment records, salary slips, even my credit history, to apply for a luxury condo lease downtown. She had listed herself as the primary resident, but filed the application under my financial backing. For a moment, I was too stunned to react. Then the realization hit. She hadn't just been shallow, she had been calculating. The bigger ring wasn't a slip of greed. It was part of a pattern. She had already been trying to secure her escape hatch, her princess lifestyle, before the wedding even had a chance to happen. I rushed to straighten things out with the bank, filing fraud reports, submitting proof that I hadn't authorized the application. It was tedious and humiliating, explaining that my own fiancé had used my information without my consent. The officer on the phone said this kind of thing happened more often than people thought. That didn't make it sting any less. When I confronted Sophie, I didn't get the tears or apologies I might have expected. Instead, she laughed. She told me I was being dramatic, that it was normal for couples to share financials, and that if I really loved her, I wouldn't make such a big deal out of it. That was when the last ounce of patience I had dissolved. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was financial, tangible, something that could ruin me if I didn't fight it. Meanwhile, her reputation outside was continuing to collapse. Her so-called friends were jumping ship one by one. Screenshots of her tantrums and her mocking me for being average spread like wildfire. I even heard from one of her cousins, who messaged me privately to say they had always suspected she wasn't in it for love. He admitted the family had mixed feelings about her behavior for years, but hadn't expected it to go this far. In the middle of all this, I kept my head down at work. Or tried to. The reality was that the drama seeped into everything. Coworkers were polite, but I caught whispers. I wasn't embarrassed about calling off the wedding. I knew I'd dodged a bullet, but no one enjoys being the subject of gossip. And Sophie wasn't done. She began reaching out to my family, spinning new versions of the story. To my parents, she said I had become cold and detached, that I'd humiliated her publicly without warning. To my sister, she hinted that maybe I had been cheating and had invented an excuse to break the engagement. It was exhausting, constantly correcting narratives, constantly bracing myself for the next lie. Then something strange happened. In the middle of this whirlwind, I received a message from a man named Jordan. I didn't recognize the name, but he claimed to be Sophie's ex. He said he had been watching the situation from a distance and finally decided to reach out because I deserved to know the whole story. At first, I thought it was another trick. But when he began sending me screenshots, my stomach sank. Sophie hadn't been faithful during our engagement. The timelines were messy, but it was clear. While I had been budgeting and planning, she had been revisiting her old flames. Jordan told me she had a pattern of hopping from relationship to relationship, always seeking the man who could offer her the most. When she thought I was her ticket to stability and a comfortable life, she latched on. When she grew restless, she slipped back into her old habits. That was when the puzzle pieces began to align. The ring, the lease, the manipulations, they weren't isolated acts. They were all parts of the same pattern. A person who saw relationships as transactions, not commitments. But I wasn't about to confront her just yet. I wanted more. I wanted to be absolutely sure of what I was dealing with. So I started gathering evidence. I archived messages, saved emails, stored screenshots in hidden folders. Every reckless outburst she posted online, every private admission leaked by a friend, I collected it. I wasn't sure what I would do with it yet, but I knew I'd need it. What kept me awake at night wasn't just anger. It was the realization of how close I had come to marrying her. How easily I could have ended up legally tied to her debts, her manipulations, her endless appetite for more. The deeper I dug, the more the cracks widened. I discovered she had been using credit cards under her parents' names for years, running up balances, and then leaving them to deal with the fallout. She had a history of failed business ventures, little online boutiques that collapsed as soon as she drained enough money from her supporters. Her entire life was built on burning bridges and moving on before the damage caught up with her. I thought back to the night she demanded the bigger ring. At the time, it had felt like a sudden, jarring ultimatum. Now I realized it was just another step in a long chain of demands. If I had given in, it wouldn't have stopped. The ring would have been followed by the condo, the designer clothes, the luxury trips. And eventually, when I couldn't keep up, she would have left, dragging half of what I had worked for with her. By the end of the second week, I knew this wasn't just about ending an engagement. This was about protecting myself, my finances, my reputation, even my family from the chaos Sophie carried with her. What she didn't know was that her downfall was already in motion. The ring post had been the first domino. Her lies were unraveling faster than she could control them. And the evidence piling up in my folders was a time bomb waiting to detonate. I had no idea then just how explosive the next stage would be. The turning point didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came quietly, through an email from Jordan. He had promised me more, and he delivered. Attached were screenshots of conversations Sophie had with him in the months leading up to our engagement. I opened them, expecting more of the same, flirtations, manipulations, but what I saw was worse. She had spelled out a strategy. Her words were blunt. Marry quickly, secure the lifestyle, file for divorce within 2 years, walk away with half. She even referred to me as the stepping stone. I read those messages 3 times before I believed them. There it was, black and white. Sophie had never planned forever. She had planned an exit strategy. I sat in silence for a long time. There's something uniquely devastating about realizing the life you thought you were building was nothing more than a business plan in someone else's head. But mixed in with the devastation was a strange sense of calm. This was confirmation. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't exaggerating. I was staring at the truth. Jordan and I exchanged more messages over the next week. He admitted he had been strung along too, convinced that Sophie would leave me for him once she secured enough financial leverage. But when he realized she was playing both sides, he cut ties. Now he wanted her exposed. He told me I had the receipts to finish her for good. I wasn't sure how to use them yet. Posting them online would turn everything into a circus. Keeping them private felt cowardly. What I needed was the right moment, the right audience. That moment arrived sooner than I expected. Sophie reached out to me, inviting me to what she called a family reconciliation dinner. She claimed her parents wanted to hear both sides, to settle things like adults. I knew better than to believe she suddenly wanted peace, but I accepted. I wasn't walking in blind. I was walking in with ammunition. The dinner was set at a mid-range Italian restaurant. the kind with dim lighting and a menu that leaned heavily on pasta dishes. I arrived early, scanning the room, rehearsing in my mind what I would say and what I would hold back. Sophie arrived with her parents, polished and smiling as if none of the chaos of the last few weeks had touched her. Her parents, Richard and Helen, were polite but stiff. They asked me how work was going, how I'd been holding up. Then Sophie launched into her performance. She spoke about misunderstandings, about stress, about how she sometimes used words carelessly. She made herself sound like the victim of a cruel internet misunderstanding, painted me as someone who had lashed out instead of talking things through. I let her go on, nodding occasionally, waiting. When she paused, I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. Then I opened the folder I had been collecting, screenshots of her chats about the bigger ring, evidence of the fraudulent condo lease application, and finally, Jordan's emails with her divorce plan. One by one, I slid the phone across to her parents. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the clink of cutlery from other tables. Helen's face paled as she scrolled. Richard's jaw tightened. Sophie reached for the phone, but her mother pulled it away, staring at her daughter like she had never seen her before. That was the moment the mask finally cracked in front of her own family. Richard asked if it was true. Sophie stammered, tried to redirect, blamed Jordan, blamed me, even suggested the screenshots were fabricated. But the words sounded hollow. Her parents weren't fools. They had raised her, seen her patterns, maybe ignored them for too long. Now they couldn't look away. Helen set the phone down and whispered that she was ashamed. Sophie's eyes filled with panic, not tears, but fear, the fear of losing her last line of defense. She turned to me, voice sharp, accusing me of trying to destroy her life. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her own words had spoken louder than anything I could have said. The dinner ended in chaos. Sophie stormed out, leaving her parents behind. Richard and Helen apologized to me, quietly, awkwardly. They admitted they had worried about her entitlement before, but hadn't realized how deep it ran. Helen confessed she had hoped marriage might settle Sophie, ground her. Instead, it had nearly ruined me. I left the restaurant feeling a strange mixture of vindication and exhaustion. I had drawn a line in the sand. Her family knew the truth now. There was no going back. But the fallout was just beginning. Over the next few days, Sophie went into overdrive. She posted long rants online about betrayal, about how she had been sabotaged by jealous exes and a controlling fiancé. She accused me of hacking her accounts, of inventing lies to smear her reputation. None of it stuck. Too many people had seen the evidence. The more she fought, the more unhinged she looked. What I hadn't expected was the calls from mutual acquaintances, people who had known Sophie long before I did. They told me stories, things I'd never heard. About how she had maxed out her parents' credit cards in college. About how she had jumped from one boyfriend to another, always upgrading based on who could provide the most. About a brief engagement years earlier that collapsed under eerily similar circumstances. Piece by piece, the portrait of Sophie solidified. She wasn't just greedy. She was predatory. The most chilling piece came again from Jordan. He told me Sophie had bragged to him once about how easy it was to manipulate men if you gave them what they wanted at the start. She had described me as predictable, someone who would give her stability until she was ready to cash out. Reading that line hit harder than anything else. I wasn't just a victim of circumstance. I had been studied, categorized, and used. That realization hardened me. Whatever sympathy I might have had evaporated. Around that time, Sophie's attempts to reconcile turned desperate. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, pounding on the door, alternating between begging and screaming. I didn't open it. She left voicemails claiming she was ready to start fresh, that we could rebuild if I would just delete the posts and stop spreading rumors. I ignored every single one. Her parents reached out once more, this time asking me if I would consider pressing charges over the fraudulent lease. I told them I hadn't decided yet. I wanted Sophie to feel the consequences, but I also knew dragging this into court would consume more of my life than I wanted to give her. Still, the option sat there, waiting. The more she spiraled, the clearer it became. Sophie wasn't just losing me. She was losing everyone. Friends distanced themselves. Family cut ties. Employers noticed the mess spilling across social media. She was unraveling, and I was watching from the sidelines, detached, almost clinical. But even as her life collapsed, I stayed cautious. People like Sophie don't go quietly. They claw, they scheme, they reinvent. And I wasn't about to underestimate her again. What I didn't know then was that the final act was coming. Louder, crueler, and more destructive than anything yet. By the time the third week rolled around, I thought I had seen the worst of Sophie's spiral. The ring debacle, the fraudulent lease, the exposure at dinner. It felt like every mask she wore had already been ripped away. but I underestimated her ability to keep clawing at the wreckage. The first sign came through work. One morning, my manager called me into his office. He had received an anonymous email claiming I had been abusive towards Sophie, that I had a history of controlling behavior, and that she had broken off the engagement for her own safety. The email was long, filled with dramatic accusations, but light on details. My manager knew me well enough not to believe it, but he had to address it formally. Sitting across from him, I felt a familiar anger bubbling. Sophie wasn't content with personal destruction. She wanted professional damage too. I calmly explained the situation, even provided copies of the fraud report I had filed with the bank. My manager dismissed the email as nonsense, but warned me that if she escalated further, HR might have to get involved. I left that office fuming. Sophie wasn't just burning bridges. She was trying to salt the earth behind her. A few nights later, she made her boldest move yet. She showed up at my workplace in person. I was leaving late, walking through the lobby, when she stepped out from the shadows, dressed in her most dramatic outfit, mascara already streaking down her face. She launched into her performance instantly, loud enough for people passing by to hear. She accused me of humiliating her, of destroying her future, of ruining her reputation. Her voice carried, sharp and trembling, and a few co-workers froze at the scene. I didn't argue. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply pulled out my phone, opened the photo I had saved, and held it up for her to see. The engagement ring listing with the caption, "barely worn." Beneath it, dozens of comments from people she knew, laughing, mocking, exposing her greed. For a second, she faltered. Her eyes darted, her voice cracked, and she realized she couldn't win this one. I stepped past her without a word, leaving her standing in the lobby with an audience that wasn't buying her act. That was the last time I saw her in person. But the fallout didn't end there. Over the next few months, pieces of Sophie's life collapsed one after another. Her job let her go after her outbursts spilled into the workplace. Apparently, she had confronted a colleague in a shouting match that was caught on camera. The luxury condo she had tried to lease under my name was flagged as fraud, leaving her with a black mark on her credit record. Her parents, Richard and Helen, pulled their financial support, refusing to bail her out this time. I heard bits and pieces from mutuals, enough to piece together the picture. She moved into a cramped apartment with a roommate she barely knew. She tried reviving one of her online boutiques, but customers quickly spread word of her past scams, and it folded within weeks. At one point, she even reached out to Jordan again, asking for help. He sent me the messages, her begging, promising she had changed. He didn't reply. There was a certain poetry in it. For years, Sophie had built her life on extracting value from others, using charm and manipulation as currency. But once her reputation cracked, she had nothing left to trade. People stopped believing her. And without believers, she had no power. Meanwhile, my own life was settling into a strange calm. Work steadied. Friends who had been hesitant at first now congratulated me for dodging the disaster in time. Even my parents, who had been skeptical about me dating Sophie so quickly in the beginning, admitted they were relieved I had walked away before it was too late. I didn't rush into anything new. For months, I focused on myself, on rebuilding the parts of my life that Sophie had nearly derailed. I canceled every joint account, changed passwords, checked credit reports religiously. I treated it like cleaning out a house after a storm. You had to check every corner for damage before you could feel safe again. But one memory lingered. That night in her apartment when she told me she wanted the bigger ring. That was the moment everything cracked. At the time, it had felt like a betrayal. Now I realized it had been a revelation. She had shown me her true self before the wedding. The mask slipped early, and I had taken it as a blessing. Months later, I heard through a mutual that Sophie had hit rock bottom. She had been evicted after failing to keep up with rent. Her parents refused to let her move back in. Old flames ignored her calls. She was bouncing from couch to couch, surviving off what little she could scrape together. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post anything more. I didn't need to. The universe had handled the rest. One evening, as I was cleaning out my apartment, I came across a printed screenshot of the barely worn listing. I had framed it as a joke, a reminder of how close I'd come to ruin. I set it on my desk. Every time I saw it, I felt the same mixture of relief and clarity. It wasn't just a caption. It was a symbol. Because in the end, Sophie had been exactly that. Barely worn, barely real, barely worth the cost. And I had walked away before she could wear me down completely. A year later, I ran into one of Sophie's former friends at a cafe. We exchanged a few polite words, and she told me the latest. Sophie was still drifting, picking up odd jobs, burning through the last of her social circle. No one trusted her anymore. Every new start she tried collapsed under the weight of her past. I walked away from that conversation lighter. I didn't need vengeance. I didn't need her punishment to be public or spectacular. I had already won by stepping out of the trap. And Sophie? She was living proof that when you build your life on manipulation, the collapse always comes. Sometimes it takes months, sometimes years, but it always arrives. For me, it came in time. For her, it came too late. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.